So before we jump into this behind the scenes, I just want to quickly clarify a couple of things. First of all, if you enjoy this video, find it intriguing, and want like even more of a peek behind the curtain of what went into this short film, then you can check out my channel memberships, where this month you'll be able to download a bunch of raw footage from the project, test it out for yourself, practice on it, or just see a bit more of what went into the projects. You can just click on the join button on my channel and you'll see some more information about that. Also, this video was originally made for Adorama's YouTube channel, so if you're subscribed to them, there's a chance you've already seen it, but if you didn't, enjoy. Spot. What's good, everyone? My name is Aiden Robbins. I'm a filmmaker and photographer based out here in the Carolinas, and a few weeks ago I had the opportunity to work with Adorama to test out the brand new Panasonic Lumix S5. If you know anything about this camera, you'll be fully aware that it has some pretty great specs, but if you know anything about me, you'll be fully aware that I couldn't care less about that. I don't buy cameras based on the specs. Instead, I want to see something made using that camera. So I decided to take this out for a few days and really just toss it into the elements and see how it would perform in the context of my own workflow and shooting environment. So I called up my homies Dave and Rachel and planned a last-minute weekend trip to the Smoky Mountains to spend a couple days shooting with this camera and hopefully make a pretty cool travel film. The film is called Photos Are Memories, and if you haven't already seen it, you may benefit from watching that before you watch this video. But that being said, in this video, I just want to walk you through kind of how we made the film, some unexpected twists and turns along the shoot, and how the camera ultimately performed in this kind of environment. Since we only had 48 hours to film this entire project, the shoot was extremely run and gun, and weather in the Smoky Mountains is notoriously unpredictable, so we were pretty much monitoring and adjusting our shoot constantly. The S5 sits kind of between the consumer and professional level, so I planned out a video with two contrasting sequences to show it in each context. One was a pretty dark, moody sequence showing a photographer pushing through tough conditions to get the shot. That's me, if you didn't pick up on that. And the other was a much lighter sequence showing a couple just vacationing around, enjoying themselves and making memories through photography. The overall theme of the video is how photography facilitates long-lasting memories, and these two sequences both show that same thing in two different ways. Both sequences required very specific weather conditions, so what we shot at any given time was determined by the weather that we had at that specific moment. So the first day of the shoot, we're shooting in this dark forest. It's very moody, so we shot footage of me hiking in the woods, hiking in the rain, setting up the camera, taking photos. And then when the sun came out and it got very light and bright, then we shot footage of the couple, you know, walking through the woods, taking photos of each other. And that remained a constant throughout the entire trip. If it was dark and gloomy, then we would shoot sequence A, and if it was lighter and sunnier, then we would shoot sequence B. We ended up shooting a lot in the rain, and the camera performed fine, didn't show any kind of water damage or stop working at any point, which is great. And we also shot pretty much exclusively with natural light, so we ended up shooting in a lot of very harsh lighting conditions, but the S5 has a really high dynamic range, which allowed me to preserve as much detail as possible. And I've got to say, once I especially started color grading, I was incredibly impressed by that dynamic range. Even in super harsh lighting conditions with bright highlights and dark shadows, the camera retained pretty much all of that detail in Vlog, and I rarely ended up with any kind of clipping in the highlights or the shadows. We also ended up shooting a lot in low light, so some of these shots we lit using only a headlamp, and others we shot in dark forests, even at blue hour, with no additional external lighting. I did end up using Neat Video to clean up some of the footage in post, but for the most part, pretty much everything we captured in low light would have been usable straight out of the camera. And that was probably what surprised me the most about this camera, was the incredible low light performance. I just wasn't expecting it and was pleasantly surprised. The S5 can do 4K 60 footage, but it's with a 1.5 times crop, and we really wanted to emphasize that full frame look, so we just stuck with 24 and 30. We also shot a lot of time lapses, and this is another one of my favorite things about this camera and every Panasonic camera is just how good the internal intervalometer is. You don't have to use an external remote to shoot a high quality time lapse. You can adjust absolutely everything in camera, the interval, the shutter speed, the aperture, all that. No limits on any of it, and the camera will save both the raw images and compress it into a video if you want to, so you have that flexibility and ease of use when you're editing and viewing that footage. Panasonic's time-lapse feature is so good that before I even knew about this camera, I always carried around a Lumix G7 in my camera bag explicitly for shooting time lapses. The only possible drawback that I noticed of the S5 while shooting this project was the autofocus. It was just very slow a lot of the time, hunted a lot, and sometimes just wasn't able to focus on an object at all. This is something that could possibly be fixed by just tinkering a bit more with the autofocus settings or using a different lens, but something to be aware of nonetheless. Once we finished shooting, this was actually a really simple edit compared to what I usually do because there was just less stuff that I had to fix in editing. I ended up grading less extensively than I normally would because I just got really nice colors out of this camera, especially with Panasonic's own Rec 709 LUT. I just slapped that on and it just looked good. And of course, I still color graded every shot in the video. I had to go for my usual moody greens, of course, but the entire color grading process was just a lot faster and less frustrating than what I'm used to. I especially love the greens and the skin tones that I was able to pull out of the vlog footage, and I didn't notice any of the footage like falling apart when I brought back all of that color and detail. Another editing trick that I was able to just leave in the toolbox on this project was post stabilization. So usually I'm used to just relying on warp stabilizer for pretty much every shot in my videos, but on this one, because of the camera's in-body image stabilization, I rarely had to use it. We shot the entire video handheld, even at 50 and 70 to 200 millimeters, and the result was just this really nice organic camera motion, not that distracting jitter that you usually get from a mirrorless camera. And because it has really good in-body image stabilization, you will sometimes notice a bit of wobbly motion around the edges of your footage if you're shooting at an ultra wide focal length, but I really only noticed it in times where I wasn't filming. So like right at the beginning of the shot where I'm getting set up, that's where I would notice it, not when I was making an effort to hold the camera still, then it would go away. And of course, if you're like vlogging or doing something where you're gonna be shooting super wide but can't concentrate too much on keeping the camera steady, then you can of course just disable that IBIS and you won't have that wobble. All that to say, I was honestly blown away by how this camera performed in my fast-paced outdoor run and gun shooting environment. All that being said, I want to give another big thank you to Adorama for supporting this project and to Dave and Rachel for coming out so last minute and making this video happen. I hope you enjoyed the film and that you enjoyed this video, getting to see a little bit of what went into it.